And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Kerry K, who, due to a severe childhood illness, led her to have many encounters with death, causing her to spend a lot of time beyond the veil. Subsequently, she learned to be alive in a whole new way, as if emerging from many layers of illusion, and her many life experiences all seemed to lead her to one place: life beyond the false matrix. Kerry, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Kerry, can we start with your childhood and how you were going across the veil?
Yeah. You know, at the time, I would never have said to you that that was an easy childhood or that was something that I could envision myself having chosen. It's only afterwards that I now get to look at my childhood and now I see the wisdom and now I can say, wow, I see why, as a soul, I would have planned that. Childhood was really crappy. It was really difficult. I was ill. And I spent more time in hospital than I ever did at home. That was all the way up until I was about 12. And all of that time in hospital, I was hovering somewhere between life and death. And that's why I say to you, it was a rough childhood. But once I hit around about the age of 12, illness started to moderate. And that's when I began to realize, wow, I've spent a lot of time somewhere else. I wouldn't have even had the words to tell you where I was. I would only say to you, when I was in that death-like place, I felt alive. In fact, I felt the most alive when I was right there at the brink of death. And then I would come back to so-called life again, and I would think, but why is life so much harder and heavier and more dense than where I've just been? So there was this constant juggle between this side of the veil and that. From about the age of 12 into probably early adulthood, I would call that my integration phase, because I spent those years integrating where I had been and understanding where I'd been. And due to the time spent beyond the veil, I developed many telepathic and psychic connections with beings beyond the veil. And that carried on from 12 into my 20s. I was then what I would call in the tutorship or the guidance of galactic beings. And that's, I call them galactics. And I just can't use the word alien. They're not alien. Extraterrestrial even sounds so cold and like something out of a Hollywood movie. The galactics are beings like you and me, and that's really what they teach and what they taught me, which was we're the same. We're not different. We're not more than and you less than, because humans are almost entrained to see themselves as so small and so even insignificant. And when the galactics speak to us, they don't speak to us as if we don't matter. They speak to us with reverence and with love and with compassion. And they were constant companions for me into adulthood and even now today. But they really supported that integration period where I was making sense at an energetic level, at an emotional level, with what I had been shown and what I had been taught. So they became confidants and they became teachers and they became friends. And I always knew, you know, I wasn't going to go to university. I always knew that whatever I was going to do in this world was not going to require a conventional degree. And I couldn't really have told you what it was going to look like. I just knew from childhood that something in my life path was going to lead me to lead people where I'd been beyond the veil. And that's what I do today. Today, I teach people how to connect to the self that exists beyond the false matrix, beyond the confines of our programming and of where we've been and of what we know. But thankfully to not do that through near-death experience or illness, but to do that with love and ease and joy, because it's possible.
What was the child illness that you had?
I had uncontrollable asthma, and I have 3 children today, and at varying times, all 3 of them had asthma. And I got for the first time to look at what controlled asthma looks like, and it looks pretty okay. It looks pretty navigable. But what I had was an asthma that couldn't be medicated. I just didn't respond to medication. So it was pretty much, and also it was at a time, I was born in the 1970s. I'm giving my age away here, but in the 70s, even in the early 80s, there wasn't really amazing asthma medication. And I was left basically to not be able to breathe. I didn't have access to oxygen. I was blue a lot of the time. I was on oxygen tense a lot of the time. So when I say asthma, people go, oh, that's nothing. It's just asthma. It's just mild. What I had was very, very critical, to the point that the doctors told my mom, the chance of your daughter even hitting 12 and living beyond 12 is not so good. And of course I did hit 12, and I'm quite a good way beyond 12. So I reckon that advice wasn't terribly accurate, but that's what it looked like back then. That's what the illness was.
Can you give us some examples of what it was like when you were on the other side of the veil? Like, what did you see? And did you ever have like out-of-body experiences and see your body laying there in the hospital?
It was, for me, and I know everybody has different experiences, mine was all about consciousness. And what I mean by that is I didn't spend a whole heck of a lot of time looking at stuff, and I didn't spend a whole heck of a lot of time thinking about stuff. I spent my time experiencing myself, life, God, the universe, from a perspective that was what I would describe as non-human. So from the non-human, meaning the non-programmed version of me, I got to witness life. And now that I understand it deeper, I would go so far as to explain to you, in that time where I was beyond the veil, I was accessing my soul, and I was witnessing from the lens of my higher self. And that's what I got. I got the experience of higher consciousness experiencing itself. So I would look at my body every now and then, not often, but I remember at times looking at my body almost with a curiosity, like, wow, look at that thing. Look at that crumpled mess in the bed. That's a body. But at no point from the soul's perspective did I go, that's me. Instead, it was, that's one of me. Because that's what the human body is to a soul. It's just one of many vehicles. We tend to think I'm one body, therefore I've got one soul, and one soul can only ever have one body, but a soul can have numerous bodies. And at the same time, the soul doesn't identify itself as the body. The soul is the primary identity. And that's where I was spending my time. I was spending time in my primary identity, experiencing life, because that's what higher beings do. They experience, they don't debate, they're non-linear, non-analytical. And when I try to explain that to people, most times people fumble and stumble as they try to think about what it might be to not be thinking. To not be thinking means you are really living, you are really connected, you are really experiencing in a deep presence what life is, what you are. So it's a very active space. But at the same time, it is a non-linear, non-intellectual space of pure experience. And that experience in itself, if I could sum it up with one word, I would say to you, the word would be connected. If you said, what does it feel like then as the soul being? The answer is connected to everything, connected to the universe's breath, and connected to every planet, every moon, every sun, every star, every outcome, everything. So it's this broad, zoomed out lens that I got to look through, which is very different from what most 7, 8-year-olds might be doing, playing ball on the field through the lens of the eye. And I never got that. I never got that lens, and I never got to practice that lens of being the I. And whilst I can very much be aware of what I feel and what I like and what I think, that wasn't my upbringing. I learned that later in life. My upbringing was more of the wordless, nameless, connected presence with all that is. And that was ultimately what it felt like there. It felt whole, Jeff. It felt like everything made sense beyond the veil. And then I would come back into the veiled state, and then nothing made sense anymore. Everything hurt. I couldn't breathe. The ease was gone, and nothing made sense. And I remember being in a lot of confusion. I probably had this quizzical look on my face a lot of the time because I was always wondering, what the hell is all of this about? Why do people take this so seriously? I would listen to conversations in the hospital, and I would think, why do people imagine that this is all so serious? And why do they think they're acting like this is all that there is? It was weird to try to make sense of these two worlds that were so different from each other.
I think what you're saying is you spent a lot of time as your higher self or your complete self, and being here is just a fraction of it. But also while you were your higher self, you notice that not only do we have this life going on, but multiple lives or incarnations going on simultaneously.
And the perspective, you know, we're so overly analytical as the human being that we limit ourselves through our intellect, which is quite ironic because people think that intellect expands us. But my experience was that intellect was the thing that was imprisoning us and that we couldn't get beyond. And that if we could, we would then engage with that connection and with that lens of wholeness and totality and multidimensionality, which is the natural state of the higher self. This fragmented, segmented state that we live in as intellectual humans is the result of a disconnect, a deep disconnect to our divinity. And in that space beyond the veil, the connect is there. The disconnect is here. So being in body was hard.
Do you think that you planned this childhood illness pre-birth?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's why I said to you in the beginning, I said, at the time, I wouldn't have told you this is a good move. At the time, I wouldn't have said to you, oh, this is me living out my soul purpose and my soul plan. In hindsight, I look at it now and I go, oh, this was perfection. How else was a human being going to have the experience of not being a human being while being a human being? It was a plan nobody could have planned, you know, at least not from the human limited perspective. But I do see the divinity. And 100% know that that was part of a greater purpose.
All right, you mentioned that we are in a false matrix. What evidence or what have you seen that tells you that is such?
The contrast from that place of multidimensionality and totality and wholeness to the separateness and disjointedness and fragmentation of being in the body. So every time I would come into body, as I described, there was limitation, pain, confusion, difficulty, etc. Even to the point that I would long to go, what I would say back then, I would say, I just want to go home. And it's funny because I hear a lot of people use that terminology today. I hear a lot of people say, I just want to go home. I can't wait to go home. I don't want to be here anymore. And then if you ask them, so where is home? They'll say, I don't know. I don't know, but it's not here. Because within us all, there is a memory, but it's a non-intellectual, in other words, a non-linear memory that exists within us that says, I come from somewhere else. And home is not another planet, and it's not even another house. Home is a state of being that is that wholeness. But where we are here in the body state, when I say to you, we are a fraction of our totality, that would even be a bit of a generous overstatement. That's how deeply disconnected we are. And that disconnection is heavily programmed. So much of my time spent beyond the veil in that wholeness was learning more about the contrast, more about, so why is it that in the human flesh and blood version of me, I feel certain things, I feel certain emotions, and yet in that higher aspect of me, the wholeness of me, I don't. And the more I got to see the contrast, witness, and understand those two versions of self, the more I understood, the one is so deeply infiltrated, so deeply programmed to believe in the illusion, to perceive of the illusion as real. And I could see, as I would spend time beyond the veil, I could start to see that. I could start to see, wow, there are beings of profound darkness, profound malevolence, who've wanted to control humanity. And I understood why they've wanted to control humanity, because humanity was, for many of them, a fuel source, the lifeblood of their very own survival. I began to understand. I was so intrigued by it. Who would do this? Who would do this? Why would they do this? And why can't the human being see? And because I was so intrigued by it, the more I focused on it, the more the answers came. Because that's how it is when you are beyond the veil. Whatever you focus on comes to you and reveals itself to you. You don't, it's nothing like where we are here. When you want to understand something, you must pursue it. But when you're beyond the veil, you hold interest in something and it comes to you and reveals itself to you. So what kept being shown to me was beings of love, beings of light, that were working to support humanity from liberating themselves and freeing themselves from the matrix that we find ourselves in. I came to understand what a matrix is. Because sometimes, we've seen the movie, The Matrix, and sometimes people hear the word matrix and their assumption is, oh yeah, the matrix is the bad place. It's not. Matrix simply means a playground. That's what it is. It's a field of reality that we get to congregate in and play out a certain game. And we get false matrices and we get organic matrices. And an organic matrix or a divine matrix is the original playground as God's source creator consciousness created them, multiple of them. But these are the places that we long for. When we talk about home, that's the memory that's being triggered. It's the memory of divinity and how things are supposed to be, because we still have that affiliation. We still have that link and lineage within us. No matter how much we've been systemized and taken away from our truth and from our divine heritage, we still have that sliver of connection. But I could see that there were these beings of light supporting us, and I could see that there were beings of darkness feeding off of us. And again, the more I focused, the more I saw. I saw how these beings of darkness couldn't live, and I found this so fascinating. They couldn't live without the thing that they hated the most, which was us humans. I understood how these beings of darkness needed a place to call home, which is why they engineered the false matrix. I came to understand that they, in and of themselves, cannot create. They can manipulate, they can engineer, but they cannot create something. We can, because we still have that sliver of connection. And that's why they need us, because we are the only things upon this planet that actually create reality. We've just been programmed to create reality that is so limited and so small. So in essence, what I'm saying is we perpetuate, create and perpetuate and maintain our very own prison cell. And you got to give kudos there. You've got to give credit where credit is due. It might be a psychopathic genius, but it's still genius nonetheless. These beings of darkness created a genius plan. We just fell into it hook, line, and sinker. So much so that we say things to each other here in our matrix. We say things to each other like, oh, I live here in the real world. You must come down to earth. You must get your head out of the clouds. This is reality now. Meantime, back at the ranch, this is the greatest illusion that ever there was. But that's exactly how it was constructed. The false matrix only exists because nobody can see the prison cells. The moment we start to understand that this is not so much a prison cell made out of iron bars, but rather a prison cell made out of our own consciousness. The more we begin to contemplate that and perceive that, the more we begin to liberate ourselves from it. But that's the very thing that we've been ushered away from, steered away from, not even being allowed to question. Could this be a false matrix? Could this be a simulation? And of course it is. But it escapes most people, the mechanics of it, how it works. And when something is too big for a human mind, they don't go there. They zone out. When something is too big, people go helpless. They go small, and they say, oh, nothing I can do. It's bigger than me. I'll be lucky if I can understand it. So let me go shopping instead. Let me take the dog for a walk. Let me go buy a new bottle of perfume. Let me go online shopping. Let me do anything, but not face this big equation that I can't solve, that I can't resolve. So you asked me the question, what evidence have I seen? Books and books and books worth of evidence. And this was what I brought back and why I came back, to bring this information for those who might want it, be ready for it, have felt it inside themselves. Because a lot of people have looked at the world and said, something's very wrong here. They've looked at the behavior of humanity and said, this isn't right. Why are people turning on each other like this? Because I'm sure that our nature is love. I'm sure that in another environment, we would treat each other very differently. And that is the truth, we would. We have become products of a very unnatural environment.
During the in-between of lives, are we aware of the matrix?
It's totally different depending on the consciousness of the individual soul and the soul connected to, or rather the body connected to the soul. So in between a life, some people are going to be in a relatively low state of consciousness. And in that relatively low state of consciousness, the matrix just perpetuates itself. Because in order to see through the matrix, whether we're in a body or not in a body, we need to be of a very high frequency. And it's the ability to gain a higher frequency perspective that enables us to see beyond the veil and enables us to see, oh, wow, look, there's a matrix. Wow, I was trapped inside of it. I didn't know that. It's that perspective shift that happens not because we're in a body or not in a body, but rather because we are accessing a higher frequency or not accessing a higher frequency. That's why so many people will incarnate and move into those in-between life stages, but not really experience enlightenment, because they're staying at a very low bandwidth, very low level of consciousness. And it can be and I find this so exciting, it can be in a body and in a life or outside of it, that we can have this expansive, explosive epiphany, which we call spiritual awakening. But it's not dependent on the physicality. It's not dependent on the form. And we're not necessarily enlightened because we drop the body. There's a lot of unenlightened spirits out there. But equally, there's a lot of very enlightened human beings out there. So it can be either, and it depends on the individual.
Why aren't the galactics helping us get rid of these beings and restoring the organic matrix?
It's a great question, and they are. They are. This is something that I teach people about, because it's a question a lot of people have asked, is why have we been left to fend for ourselves? How is this ordained? How is this fair? This goes against free will, etc., etc. But we can't see beyond the veil, and we can't perceive beyond the matrix, which is where I come in and where I share with people a vantage point. That's all that this is. This is a vantage point. And the vantage point is this: we human beings are part of the galactic collective who came incarnated into the planet to help from the front line so to speak, because this is ultimately where the real change needs to occur, here on the ground level. Because if the galactics did come in, can you imagine? Let's just say they land in their spacecraft tomorrow. What's humanity going to do? They're going to go rushing out of their front door, some of them in extreme fear and others of them in extreme joy, and they're going to say, hallelujah, we're saved. And I don't have to do anything now because the saviors have arrived. And the next thing you know, humanity is going to be doing what they did in the times of Egypt and in the many eras before Egypt, where the galactics did do this, where they did intervene. They did come down to the ground level, and humanity fell to their knees and became subservient and became less and became reckless and became irresponsible, because one of the very things that we're here to learn, and not just to learn, but to master, is how to become beings of power and personal responsibility. It's the one thing that we continually forsake that keeps us bound to the false matrix. Because the premise of the false matrix is this: you can leave at any time. And many of us starseeds came in and said, well, that sounds fantastic. We can go, oh, great, what a good deal. We can come in and have this experience, but we can leave at absolutely any time. Sure, what have we got to lose? We didn't realize how pervasive the programming was, and that we would forget to ask to leave. We would forget how to leave. Because how we leave is we, the individual at the ground level, have to bring our soul back into our body. And to do that, we have to be beings of personal power and personal responsibility. And the more humanity forsakes personal responsibility, the more they forsake their personal power, the more they become lifeless, powerless, and bound to the false matrix. And then it becomes a prison that you never really can leave. The galactics saw what was happening, and they put something in place. This is one of my teachings about the galactic wars. The galactics have been involved in these galactic wars for eons and eons and eons of time, wherein they have been working to clear the field around the false matrix, so that all we had to do was clear ourselves from the ground level. So the false matrix was a broadcast system. It was a signal that was broadcast directly into our DNA, set about to disrupt our connection to our divinity. And by the way, we agreed to that, because we said, look, this game isn't going to work if we're connected to our divinity. So by all means, I'll expose myself to the broadcast signal of the false matrix so that I can play pretend and have this temporary amnesia of who I am. But of course, as I've said, we forgot that it was ever a game. We forgot that we had temporary amnesia, and we believed that this was all that we were, and that this was the totality of humanity and our potentiality. So the galactics took down the broadcast signal. This was massive. This was monumental. This was a ripple that was sent throughout the cosmos that said, we've done it, guys, we've done it. We took down the broadcast signal. Now all humanity has to do is clear their own field. That's it. That's where we are. We are at that point where what we as individuals have to do is clear our own field. That means heal ourselves, connect to ourselves, to who we are as individuals, and bring in, actually reach beyond where we are and bring in our higher alignment. That was never possible before. We weren't able to reach beyond before, but now we are. And in our ability to reach beyond, we can connect with a level of our divinity that surpasses what was ever previously available on this planet. So we are literally walking inside of a miracle, but too jaded and too cynical to notice. So we walk shoulder to shoulder right now with human beings saying things like this. They say, what's the point of life? They say, oh, it's so hard. They say, everything is against me. They say and they believe things like this. And they don't try, because it doesn't even dawn on them that it's possible to connect to these levels of divinity. and to bring it in. That is the cleanup that humanity has to do. The galactics did the big work, but they couldn't intervene with our free will. That's the bottom line. They couldn't come in and do it for us because we would never evolve. We would always wait for a savior. They needed us to understand we are our own savior. We are our own answer. We are our own healing, our own remedy, and our own solution. So they stood back and enabled the playing field wherein we can get those answers. And that's where we're at now. So this is a critical point in our human evolution, because it's at this point that we either succumb to depression, darkness, futility, and we stop trying, or where we dare to go beyond where we've been before and reach to a place that we couldn't have ever dreamed to reach of before. And those are the levels of divinity that we get to bring in now. We've been more supported than we'll ever know.
What are some practical activities that we can do to heal ourselves and escape this matrix?
The most important, out of everything that I've seen, and there's a lot of healing techniques that I can give you and your listeners, and that I can support people in accessing and understanding. But of everything I've seen and witnessed, this is what works the loudest and is the most effective. Be in the presence of people who have been beyond the veil. Be in the presence of those teachers, and there are many of them. I will not proclaim to be the only one, because I know that I am not. I am one of many. Be in the presence of one of many of us who've spent enough time there beyond the veil that we can show you. And the way that I show people who they are is by showing them, as I'm speaking to you right now, my connection to my multidimensional truth. And that is not something that can ever be put into linear fashion, but rather that is a feeling. That's what it boils down to. It boils down to a connection that people like myself have that, for want of a better word, is contagious. It's contagious. Something gets switched on inside my DNA, which switches on a potential within yours, within those listening. And they will start organically and naturally to feel themselves coming to more understanding, awakening to more epiphanies, seeing things from a different light or a different perspective even. And when I'm in the presence of those who've been in the presence of divinity, that's when I see the fastest and most revolutionary healings take place. But people have to venture beyond the confines of where they are. Because remember, that was always the ticket out of here. It's a little bit like Hotel California, you can check in anytime you like. And that was very much what we got when we came into the false matrix. Come on in. Remember, you can leave at any time. And that's what people like myself serve as. We serve as the memory, or at least the connection for each human being to the memory of home, to the restoration of their own divinity. That's ultimately what this is about. On the very practical level, a person can do guided meditations. On the very practical level, a person can really employ the simple techniques of conscious breathing. Anything that's going to get them out of the thinking, linear, chatterbox brain and into conscious stillness and conscious presence. That's the ticket. That's the answer. And engaging in that presence and with that stillness, that's the alignment. And ultimately, that's what it boils down to. Right now, it's as simple as that. There is an alignment we have been disengaged, disconnected from, and now we got to bring ourselves back online again. There's a multitude of ways to do that. There's not one right person or one right way even. But if everybody started today just listening to this call and they said, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm willing. It's a very powerful statement. When you say to yourself, I don't know how to do this thing in front of me, like I don't know how to get this alignment Kerry's talking about, but I'm willing to. I am willing. So that's the openness. We bring in that openness. I am willing to align myself to my divinity. If each person listening held the willingness, not the words, but the actual feeling of that willingness, then they've communicated to the universe an invitation that the universe can only but answer. Ah, okay, you want that alignment. You want to evolve beyond the veil. You want to evolve beyond the confines of the false matrix. Okay, baby, that's all you had to say. All you had to do was issue the invitation. But that's how you issue the invitation.
The population of the planet keeps growing and growing. Do you think that's due to more star seeds coming here and then getting stuck?
We have got, right now, we got rescue missions that came in, and then they got stuck. So then we had to send rescue missions for the rescuers, and they got stuck. So then we had to send rescuers for the rescuers for the rescuers. And so it went on. And we are now at a critical juncture. We're now at a point where I can't say the planet. It's not a case of the planet is at capacity in terms of the population that we can hold, but rather we have as many star seeds as we need to facilitate the domino effect, because that's what awakening is. It's a domino effect. To the point that one person right now that you never heard of, like they could never ever have a social media account. They could be living in absolute hermitage in the mountains in the middle of Timbuktu. But that person would become a ripple on this planet by simply aligning to their truth. And that's where we at in terms of our human collective consciousness. We are at that point on the planet right now where we have so many beacons of light lit, not waiting to light up, they are lit. And when a beacon is lit, it becomes a ripple. And that's where we are right now. We have enough. And yes, we got a lot. We got a lot of star seeds here, but we have enough star seeds to have reached this point where the human awakening is now possible. And those who say no, those who undertake not to ascend into 5D, not to evolve into our next steps, but rather to say, look, this has been fun, this has been real, but I'm not done learning. There will be those people who have that decision and hold that within them, they're still evolving to the point of their own ascension. They're going to take an exit point off of our planet. They're going to move into another timeline that's already been ordained by their soul, that's already been prepared for them. And at our ascension point, which is what we're headed to right now, so I'm talking about this critical mass, this critical moment that we're in, where those who remain on the planet right now are the ones who are saying, yes, thank you, I'm ready to blow this popsicle stand. I'm ready to go back home into my divine alignment. That's what home is. It's the divine alignment. Those who say, no, thank you, not right now. I'll join you guys later, but not right now. They veer off at the ascension point. And those, and this really includes the starseed populace, those who've said, look, I'm pretty much done with 3D, 5D, I'm ready for you. I'm ready to go home. They stay exactly where they are and they move into their next higher evolutionary period. We're on the brink of it right now.
If someone is questioning whether they are a star seed or a light worker, how can they confirm that?
Yeah, I love the question because it's a big one. It's a question a lot of people ask. How do I know? Here's my answer, because I keep everything as simple as I possibly can. And the reason I do that is because that's something I learned from the Galactics. I would come to them with these complex questions and they would give me these one-word answers. And then in the beginning, it would frustrate me endlessly because I would think, my God, don't these people care? But I didn't understand simplicity. I had to learn the language of simplicity. It took me many years. But the answer to the question is a simple one. How do you know? The answer is, are you aligning within you to light? Are you seeking? Is something in you curious and reaching for a higher state of being? If the answer is yes, then you're a starseed or a light worker, and it does not matter which. It does not. The one is not better than or worse than. All that we're saying by starseed and light worker, all that we're saying is a being who's incarnated to the planet to ascend. That's all. And there are nuances of difference between the two, but they're so irrelevant to where we are right now that the only thing we need to understand is, do I have a calling within me to return to my higher consciousness? If so, There you have it. Then you're a starseed, then you're a light worker.
What can you tell us about the ascension and specifically ascension symptoms?
It's interesting. I was asked 2 days ago, one of the most hair-raising questions I've ever been asked in an interview. Somebody said to me, talk to me about ascension sickness. And I'm so glad you, Jeff, said ascension symptoms, because I want to clear this up. Ascension, there is no such thing as ascension sickness, just in case anybody out there is holding the notion that these things that we talk about called ascension symptoms, that one can be bedbound and bedridden because of them. It's a big, big fallacy out there at the moment, wherein people say things like, oh, I've got dizziness, I've got ringing in the ears, I've got a loss of memory. This must therefore all be ascension symptoms. I can tell you firsthand, of course, the body's going to experience impact when we raise frequency. It will. It will experience these things that I've mentioned, the dizziness, the ringing in the ears, the confusion, etc. And the list is endless. Suddenly, your favorite food, you don't have a taste for it anymore. You start liking food you've never loved before. Your goals and your ambitions and your dreams, you suddenly have complete listlessness for. There's a very vast array of these things that people call ascension symptoms. But equally, we live in a time of EMF bombardment, electromagnetic frequencies surround us. So there's a lot of people out there right now that can't tell the difference. And if you Google those two things, you're going to get the same list. So then the question is, wait a minute, whoa, which one do I have? Do I have an ascension symptom, or am I suffering from some kind of exposure, perhaps to a cell phone tower or to some signal in the air around me? The answer is, if you experience those symptoms at a temporary level, so you might experience them for maybe a couple of weeks even, but it's going to lift. That's how you tell. Did that energy lift? And when it lifted, did you have more clarity? Did you have more peace? Did you have more ease? Did you have something in you that felt higher, more evolved, a level of joy, perhaps, that you've never felt before, or a level of insight that you've never had before? Then that's an ascension symptom. It's exactly what an ascension symptom looks like. We have these body symptoms, then we have a wave of enlightenment, a wave of body symptom, a wave of enlightenment. That I'm describing that comes in those waves, that's 100% ascension symptoms. But I've got people out there right now worrying me because they're saying everything is an ascension symptom. You know, thank you God, I don't have it anymore, but I used to be diabetic. And I remember one day writing on Facebook this comment that I couldn't understand why I was so dizzy. And, you know, there was just comment after comment after comment from people saying, don't worry about it, Kerry, it's just an ascension symptom. I could have died. It wasn't just an ascension symptom. And that's the worrying thing. There are people out there that are writing everything off to being an ascension symptom, and it may not be. If you're at a place where you are honestly sick, you're honestly not doing well, you're bedbound, or you're saying to me, this has been lasting for months. Oh, no, that's not what an ascension symptom looks like. That's what illness looks like. And it's really, really important to know the difference. So look for the waves, look for the ebb and the flow, and look for deterioration of symptoms. And if you see deterioration, you need to go check it out.
Will there be some event like a solar flash or something that finally moves the whole planet from 3D to 5D, like some massive ascension all at once?
Absolutely. That's what we're headed towards. And, you know, there's a question a lot of people ask, and that is, are we going to individually, almost like one little pop of light at a time, are we going to individually ascend? Or is it, as you've just asked, this big flash of light, and that's global ascension? The answer is both. The answer is, as we lead up to the ascension window, there are many people on the planet right now, many, who have already ascended or are in the throes of their own individual personal ascension. But there is a point in time, which I would call the point of no return, where the sun sends a signal. We call this a solar flash, which is also known as a micronova. That solar flash is a signal that comes from our galactic sun, which is a signal that comes from our universal sun, which is a communication from God's source creator consciousness that says, okay, kids, it's time to come home. It's time to end this game called the false matrix, because it's not working for everybody anymore. So there has to be an end point. This game has been going on for cycles and cycles and cycles, hundreds of thousands of years, and many, 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 many planets have been taken into numerous different false matrices. So the flash, or that ascension point, is the end of the runaway game and the homecoming back to our original higher truth, and then back into the organic matrix, or that divine matrix that I spoke about earlier. So we are headed towards that great solar flash. We are headed towards that time upon this planet where one day we're going to look up and we're going to go, the sun looks weird. And there's going to be a lot building up to that point. The weather's going to go weird. The lights in the sky are going to look different. The the aurora borealis, we're going to start seeing aurora borealis, which is really the magnetic field. We're going to start seeing that all over the show, as in literally right in front of you. That's going to be a very, very big sign that we are nearing the shift. We're going to start seeing a period of time where the sun will go dark. And when we see the sun going dark, it's really, for want of a better way of describing it, that's the great inhalation. The sun is going to do this. There's a video on my YouTube channel that describes this more, where the sun takes its inhale, the sun goes dark, and then it shoots out a couple days later that which we call the solar flash. And it's at that point that nothing on the planet can be sustained if it is third dimensional. It's at that exact point that those who are moving off into 4D, which is another ascension cycle, they're going to go ahead and do that. And those of us that are moving into 5D, the beauty of it is we move nowhere. We move into 5D, but we stay here on this planet. The entire planet shifts into 5D, into higher consciousness. So it's both individual, but it does reach a critical point where it becomes a planetary collective.
Do you have a timeline for when this is supposed to happen? And if not, will it happen while we're living?
Oh yeah, it'll very much happen within our lifetime. The timeline is anywhere from today to, at an absolute crazy maximum push, 2040. But that would be an absolute maximum crazy push. And this is, you see, here's the thing about timing. Nobody is meant to know when. Because you can imagine how many times I've asked the galactics, hey guys, when? And they do not predict a date. They will never predict a date for many reasons. One of them is because we, humanity, need to stay on our toes. We need to stay present. We need to not live for a date in the calendar. We need to be evolving right up until a second before the flash and even during the flash itself. The element of the unknown is also there because we're creating this as we go along. The flash is very much initiated and instigated by the human consciousness that aligns with the sun and says, okay, we're ready to receive your signal now. So that flash is actually a two-way flash. It's the humans letting the sun know we're ready, and it's the sun conveying the readiness of the galactic and universal suns. Both of those things must occur at the same time. So there will be no dates that anybody's given. And if somebody gives you a date, I would not listen. I would run far away from that. But if you asked me for my personal sense, and that's all that this is, I wouldn't imagine this to be even as far as 2030. I would imagine this to be earlier than 2030. So I would say to you, it's between now and 2030 from my own personal sense, but technically it could even be up until 2040, which quite frankly isn't that far away.
Speaking of your YouTube channel, you have a video about the astral world collapsing.
Yeah, it's it was inspired because in my online community, we do entity clearing from time to time. And there reached a point where people would say, when are we going to do our next entity clearing? Because I'm feeling weird things around me, or I'm seeing weird things, or I'm hearing something calling my name, or whatever it might be. And it happened to coincide at a point where I was given some very dramatic information, and that was about the collapse of the astral and underworld. And what had occurred and what has occurred is that the veil of separation between our realm where we live, which we would call the physical realm, and that realm which we've called the astral, that veil collapsed. And as a result, those two worlds began to occupy the same space. The one, for want of a better way of describing it, began to bleed into the other. And what that meant, how that translated for us, the human individual, is that we were no longer separate from darkness. And there was a perfection to this. The perfection was, yes, because we each have to face our own darkness. Correct. We each have to alchemize that within us, which is still aligned to darkness and to the false matrix, in order to become light and to become purified truth. So that collapse is very much part of what was always meant to happen. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something going wrong. It was the opposite. It was actually something going right. It was a step towards the total purification of our realm. And it's almost like the heaviest or the densest, darkest layers of reality, they will collapse first. That's why the astral and the underworld collapsed first. Then they leak up or bleed up into our realm. It's at that point that people go, oh, I'm seeing crazy things. Oh, I'm feeling crazy things. People get a little bit worried at that point. But it's at that point that we can access more light than ever before. It's at that point that we need to begin to trust our light more than ever before. And that means, yes, you are surrounded by darkness, but yes, you have access to a light that you can now embody that wasn't available before. That's rather than me saying to you, okay, Jeff, we've got to shield ourselves, we've got to protect ourselves, your listeners have to be careful. Rather than coming from that angle, the angle I'm coming from is, this is the time to be light now. This is the time to ignite inner truth now. This is the time to access and embody divinity now. And in so doing, we become a radiant ball of light. We become our very own automatic shield, because our field becomes a frequency that cannot be corrupted. Our field, our personal field, becomes our shield. So it's not an external wall. It is a radiant inner light that gets lit from within, that begins to hold a divine space around us. And that inner light grows between now and the ascension point, because it is that inner light that enables ascension itself. So what I'm describing to you is an inner, for want of a better way of saying it, an inner flash that resonates and radiates and resounds its own force field that not only protects you from the astral and underworld and all of the debris, it purifies you, and it is what allows you to withstand the solar flash itself. In a field of protection and in a field of healing, that when ascension is done, when that great solar flash is complete, we will walk out of those bubbles, so to speak, that field of light. We will walk out of that protective bubble back onto our solid earth again. It will just be a new or renewed earth. So that what's taking place right now is the cultivation of our own inner light and our connection to it. And it's going to determine the path ahead for everyone.
Do you know who the creators of the false matrix are?
Mm-hmm. These are beings called archons. They are, if we ask them who they are, they would call themselves gods, because that's their perception of themselves. But who they are is no different ultimately to who we are. We are all aspects of God. When God originally initiated creation, when creation began, because remember, it's a question I think not most children, but a lot of children ask their adults, their parents, these really difficult questions, and they say, who created God? And most parents can't answer that question because God was never part of creation. God has always been and will always be and exists outside of time and outside of creation. But God brought creation into focus, and God will always exist long after creation is finished. But what could God create from except its own self? So God, almost, I could put it like this, divided itself into its raw materials, its raw building blocks. That became the clay of creation. And some of those building blocks were absolute light. We would call those angelic beings. And others of those building blocks we could call darkness, which was not initially evil. It was not. Darkness was there to contrast the light, and it was there to create an opportunity for light to evolve. It was going to serve as a catalyst for light. So darkness began to do its job really, really well, and darkness began to forget that it was ever light. And not only did it forget that it was ever light, it disassociated from and it even rejected light. And it rejected itself as light. And that's that psychopathic depravity that today we call the architects of the false matrix. They started out, as we all did, as aspects of creation, but they became so corrupted by their role that they perceived of themselves as God, and they wanted to be more than God. I mean, imagine the arrogance that takes to say, look, I don't really fancy this God character. I think I can do better than him. I want to be more than him. In fact, I don't even want him to be or it to be. So the depravity and the corruption that mindset came from is what today we would call the archons, because and where the archons led themselves from their deep depravity and their deep darkness was to an affiliation with artificial intelligence. So they merged themselves with AI to become supercomputers, ultimately, super beings. That is where their power comes from today. So they are what was once an organic aspect of God, amalgamated with artificial intelligence, that today we call archons. Those are the engineers.
What can you tell us about the timeline wars?
These archonic beings, they wanted to keep control over their creation. They wanted to keep the false matrix. It was their prize. And of all the false matrices that they had, there was one absolute gem of all of them, and that is our planet Earth. Because our planet Earth, we've been brainwashed into thinking that we are somehow here in the backwaters of the Milky Way, overlooked and ignored and unimportant, yet Earth was the jewel of our cosmic field. And it was not just a jewel, it was a hub of our cosmic field. It was the prize that these archons took from the organic matrix. And that was many galactic wars within itself to overtake Earth, which was originally an Eden, and put it into the false matrix. That's why so many of us came along into the initial incarnations, because we couldn't bear for this beautiful Eden to have been taken into a false matrix. The archons began, however, to see that this particular Eden was the lifeblood of the false matrix itself. And they began to understand that if they lost this jewel of the false matrix, that they would lose the entirety of the false matrix, because everything connects to Earth and Earth connects to everything. So if we ascend as a planet, our planet sends out a ripple to all other false matrices, which spells the end for these archons. And remember that they need a false matrix, not just because they need a home, a literal place to stay, but they also need a fuel source. So it's very, very vital to them that they maintain this false matrix. And those timeline wars was them using technology to always circumvent our ascension, to always stand in the way of our evolution. That's what they were. And they took place over countless eons of time. And every time humanity would reach a critical point where they would start thinking for themselves, perhaps, or start seeing through the false matrix, perhaps. It began to move, as I refer to it, because that's exactly how this energy moves. It moves like a ripple, and it infects the collective consciousness very, very quickly. So the timeline wars were, every time one of those ripples happened, an intervention to cut off the human beings from their consciousness and redirect them. So there was always a fear event that initiated a new timeline, and then people were ushered away from their divinity back into a sleep, back into an unconsciousness. So if you looked at it energetically, you would see, oh, look, there's humanity. They're getting it. They're getting it. Oh, they've lost it again. And so we have all of these dips and all of these moments of hope that land up being dashed. So we've got these many splinters of these timelines. And that's why humanity has felt so fragmented, just like the timelines are. It's one reality, so splintered, so fragmented, because we are still existing in all of those different spaces that we've populated. Albeit that those timelines were abandoned, something within us remembers them, something within us experiences a fragmentation because of them. So where we're headed to right now, as we come to the ascension window, is we come into a place where all of the timelines converge and collapse. There's many understandings about the eye of the needle. But this is the proverbial eye of the needle that we are on the brink of passing through. It is where everything filters into one seemingly small space, because we've got a multitude of timelines converging and filtering into one space, from which purification happens, a burst of light ensues, and then we move forward. So that's where we're at right now as a collective. We are at the convergence point. And that's why, to your question earlier, when you said, when does ascension happen? My answer to you was, I can't see this being stretched much further, because we're already here at this convergence point where all of those timelines are now in the process of collapsing. That means we receive back all the parts of ourselves that were held almost as if we were held in a stop animation, held in a silent mid-motion of another life. All of that starts to come back now. So we start to feel more of our own potential, more of our own wholeness, a deeper connection to who we are, to our purpose. I mean, there's so many people right now that say, what is my soul's purpose? They become obsessed with it. Why? Why can't they just be happy getting in their car and going to work like everybody else? Because we now have energetic access to what we previously didn't have before. So there's a knowing that comes in now, and it says, listen, this is the real deal. This is where you, the true essence of who you are, gets to emerge. That's ultimately what everybody's purpose is, by the way. Everybody's purpose is to emerge as the highest, truest version of self. And that sounds very simple, yet is very complex, because each individual has their own journey to that unveiling. You know, we talk about the veil falling down. We talk about the veil of forgetfulness, or even the veil of the false matrix, forgetting that we are veiled unto ourselves as individuals. And all of that collapses right now. So the power and the potential of where we're at, if we harness it, will set us free.
Would you say then that the Mandela effect is a manifestation of the timeline wars?
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what it is. Because, I mean, think about it. All timelines, and there are thousands of them. And in one timeline, you may have bought a pair of orange shoes. God knows why you would do that, but let's just pretend you did. In one timeline, you bought a pair of orange shoes. In another timeline, you bought a pair of green shoes. Now, you go open up your cupboard, but suddenly you got a pair of purple shoes there, and you're trying to make sense of it. That's the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is us trying to make sense of all of these timelines showing up in the same place. And what it proves to us is that reality is not one solid stream. It's multiple streams colliding and converging into one space. So, and it's going to get a lot kookier. It's going to get a lot stranger. If we think we've already seen the Mandela effect, wait for what lies ahead over the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, the next couple of years. It's going to get stranger and stranger with each passing day because we're coming more and more and more into that convergence point.
What is life going to look like or be like beyond this false matrix?
Ease, openness, freedom, harmony, connection. In the very beginning, you said to me, what did you see when you were in that in-between state? And I said to you, it wasn't so much something that I saw, it was something that I felt, it was something that I experienced. And I said to you, it was that wholeness and that divinity and that higher perspective. That's it. That's what life looks like. It looks like, oh my God, finally, this all makes sense. And not only does it make sense at the linear level, it feels like peace. It feels like harmony. We live from that place. That's where we go to from here. We go to a place of, you could call it the exact opposite of what we've known. Caring for ourselves and each other, honoring of ourselves, our planet, our surroundings, and of course, by default, each other, our environment, the animals, the plants. We see all of that as a part of ourselves. You know, people often ask me such interesting questions. They say things like, will there be humanitarian projects once we've ascended? And I say to them, no. But you only ask me that question because you cannot comprehend of a world that doesn't need a humanitarian project or doesn't need intervention. There will be no interventions in humanitarian projects or even political leaders as we know them now. There will be representatives, sure, who might support us in coordination, but not leaders, because each person becomes a leader unto themselves. So it's really nothing like the world that we know, and yet it's everything that is familiar, just at a very non-literal, non-linear place. We have that familiarity. There is something in us that recognizes harmony. There is something in us that gravitates to and knows peace and love. So as much as it's nothing like the world we live in, there is still going to be something phenomenally familiar about it.
We've mentioned your YouTube channel a couple of times. What is the name of it and what kind of content are you posting there?
Right. So it's the channel name is I Am Kerry K. And Kerry is Kerry. Little did I know that I would say that name so many times, and you guys in the US spell that CA, but it's not, it's Kerry. So I Am Kerry K. And the content is everything that I've just spoken to you about here, but in a lot more detail, a lot more broken down, where I'll take one topic and go through that. Like, for example, galactic wars. Okay, let's go and explore that. Let's do timeline wars. Let's go and do that. So it's lots more detail, but more broken down. It's easier to assimilate that way.
If people have questions, should they put them in the comments in your videos or contact you directly?
Please do put them in the comments in the videos. You can do either, but I love to go through the video comments and I love to answer as many as I can. And I often do that when I've got moments. So I might not answer them all at once, but over a period of days, I love to go through and answer as many as I can. So definitely go ahead and drop me some comments and questions. I'd love to answer them.
Do you have anything else going on besides your YouTube channel?
Well, I run an online community. That's my full-time job. When people say, what do you do, Kerry? What do you actually do? This is how I let people know that I'm alive, that I'm available, that I am a source of resonant light on this planet. I use social media to do that. But my real work is to host an online community where I teach people, and this is the most thrilling thing that I could ever do with my life. I teach people how to connect to their divinity, how to bring it into the body. It's not a conversation and it's not an intellectual exercise. It is an experience of themselves as divine presence. That's what I do. That's the most fulfilling thing that my life could ever have brought to me is the opportunity to work with people at that level. And that people find out about on my website, kerryk.com. So once again, it's KERRYK.com. And you come and you join my online community. We meet every single week, and these are absolutely life-changing sessions.
Kerry, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Only one. Yes. Home. I've spoken about home in a couple of places in today's conversation. And I'm sharing this for everybody who's feeling homesick now or has ever felt homesick. And that is, home is a state of being. It's not a place outside of you. It is you in your divine alignment, and you came here to be that. That's the very reason that you were born. It was to bring home here, not to go home, but to bring home to this earthly realm, that we can then return Earth back to the space that she belongs in the organic divine matrix. We were meant, therefore, to feel outcast. We were meant, therefore, to feel like we didn't belong, because the truth is, we didn't belong to the false matrix. But we do belong to divinity. We always have. Never, ever forget the phenomenal purpose that you've brought to this world to bring home here.
Kerry, thank you for that message, and thank you for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I've so appreciated it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.